I'm happy to be here, and thanks to all of the co-sponsors. And I want to introduce and get to the conversation quickly. So Jim Messina, who all of you know, President Obama's 2012 campaign manager and principal at the Messina Group, and he's elected not one, not two, hey EJ, not three, not four, but 8 prime ministers or presidents around the world. Just for the record. And we have Jen Psaki, who was Obama's 2012 press secretary, former White House communications director, and now vice president for communications and strategy at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. So please join me in welcoming our 2 speakers. So I hope you put your phones up, because I know you're getting calls from lots of presidential campaigns. And if you do get one during the next half hour, put them on speakerphone, because we'd all like to participate. But the question for you to start is, what is the #1 piece of advice that you would give to any 2020 campaigns who are calling, seeking your counsel?
Oh, should I start? Well, thank you, and thank you. And we want to make this fun. We know we are the last thing between all of you and a drink, so we will make this entertaining, I hope. There's a lot of advice I would give, but the first one I would give would be to take out your phone, delete Twitter, put it back in your pocket, and move about your business of organizing or communicating or gathering or engaging with voters. And I think, I live in Washington, so far too many people are focused on the Twitter debates and the Twitter discussions, either because you're getting accolades or because you're being criticized. And I think I don't have to tell anybody in this room that is not reflective of the conversations happening in the country or the mood or positions on issues. So I would say delete Twitter, or just don't let it drive your day, would be my advice.
Yeah, I think it's great advice. My advice would be a couple things. First of all, I would say, are you fucking crazy? And
we're so tired still.
Right. I'm
crazy,
like,
but crazy about what?
Right. There's 25 candidates. I think I've met with 37 potential candidates, right. And my biggest piece of advice is the winner of the economic argument is going to win the presidency. And what economic argument do you have to advance? What is your vision for where you're going to take this country? And how can you talk about it in a way that's compelling to voters? And I think candidates need to stop thinking about, money and Twitter and all those things. Jen's exactly right. And really, who am I? And what do I want to be? And why should I be the president of the United States? And what is my vision for this country? Because there's this really stupid debate inside of our party about turn out the base or talk to swing voters. And the truth is, the 3 candidates who've won the presidency in my lifetime as Democrats, Clinton, Obama, and Carter, did both. Yeah. And candidates have to do both. And I hate this. We need to say this to excite African Americans. African Americans and Latino voters care about jobs. African Americans and Latino voters want to hear where you're going to take them as a country. And swing voters care about a more inclusive world. And so we need to do both of those things. And that's the kind of candidate I think is going to win our nomination.
Okay, let me follow up with you on this point, right? So you're saying you have to mobilize the base and win swing voters. So that's the path to 270. Okay, but against Trump in 2020, does that change your calculus at all? And let me just put you on the spot. Which one of the candidates you think could do that more easily?
Let me do the second one first, because I don't think anyone knows, right? And the amount of people who told me Barack Obama would never win the Democratic nomination or the presidency twice is like everyone in this room times a kabillion.
I hope you took a lot of bets on that.
Exact number.
Right, exact number, right? And the truth is, everyone said he can't win until he won twice. So people who say, oh, this is definitely the best general election candidate or this person can't win, I just don't believe any of that. And that's why I'm kind of counterintuitive. I think a bigger primary is good for us because I think we want to go out there. Jen will remember this. Barack Obama came out of a 50-state primary against Hillary Clinton. We campaigned in all 50 states. And by the time we went into the general election, he knew who was good in every state, what were the good activists, what his message was. He'd been through Reverend Wright. He'd been through some really tough things. He was locked and loaded for a general election in a way that really strengthened him. So I think this process could actually really help us.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. I also think there is, in the either or category of warnings, there's sort of this purity test about going on right now in the discussion about how we need to get to 270, right? It's, are we going to appeal to the voters we lost in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, or are we going to not do that and not focus on that and appeal to Arizona and Texas, the big blue whale? I think we don't need to determine what the pure path is. The question is how we get there with numbers. So really, it's you have to make some decisions, as Messina knows and Liz. Later in the process that can be heartless. If Michigan does not look like it's in play, then don't put money in Michigan and put money in New Mexico or put money in Arizona, and that can be a difficult decision. I would just peel off on one of the things you said too. One of the things I think we've seen, data was a big part of our campaign back in 2012, certainly 2008, certainly was in 2016 as well. In the advice category, I would say, data also can lead you down a bad path, which is segmenting your message and segmenting how you're communicating with people, and thinking about, okay, if I'm communicating with the disability community, I'm going to say this. If I'm communicating with African Americans, I'm going to say this. If I'm communicating with women, I'm going to say this. That's a mistake, because nobody knows what you're standing for, why you're running, who you are, and why you're better than the other guy. That's something I hope that we see candidates avoid, even in the primary.
Okay, Psaki, on this point of communication, we know Trump is lots of things. And by the way, we were talking about Winston backstage. If you ask him about his choice words for Trump at the reception. But we know one thing is he's a distractor in chief. And so he's in Florida today. He's doing this big thing about immigration. So on communication, what advice would you give the 2020 candidates about responding to him during the campaign versus staying on their message?
So the advice I would and have given to campaigns is the primary season right now, you should be running to define who you are and why you are running and why you are a better choice for the American people. So every candidate should be able to answer 3 questions, in my view. Why are you running for president? It sounds very basic, but a lot of people can't answer it. What will you do for the American people? And why are you better than the other guy? And if they can answer those 3 questions, I think they'll be effective. It should primarily be about the first 2. I would advise them that attack dog business can largely be left to the DNC, in some cases to state parties, to money that's being put up by issue groups. Let them define Trump. There are moments where you may have to jump in there, but you should be defining who you are, because I think voters are really looking for that.
Yeah, and I think it's a very hard thing if you're a campaign, right? Because Donald Trump's like free beer later tonight. Everyone likes it. Like, hitting Donald Trump is the easiest and most fun thing you can do.
And it feels good.
Right, it feels so good. I do it every morning on Twitter, and I like get up and drink my Diet Coke and say mean shit about the president, and then go to work, and I feel great about my life, right? And I'm always right. And if you're a campaign, you even get more rewarded, right? Because you make money online, and you get press. But Jen's exactly right. The winner of the presidential race will be someone who can lay out a compelling economic vision. The winner of the last 6 presidential races has been the person who wins the single question, who's better on the economy? And you have to spend your time, especially, we were talking to reporters outside earlier, and they're like, in a 10-way debate, what should you do? The first thing you shouldn't do is ever mention any other Democratic person's name in that room, right? You have to spend your time saying, this is who I am and what I want to do. And that is a full-time capacity thing. Because when you have 23 opponents, there's just not enough oxygen to do all this other stuff. You've just got to live and breathe your message. And, a lot of these people are still playing with that message. And that's not surprising, right? I remember when John McCain picked Sarah Palin, everyone for the first 48 hours thought it was this brilliant pick, and she had this great rollout. And I remember
where I was.
Right.
I was on a bus with reporters thinking like, oh, shit, this
right,
is bad.
Exactly right.
I was wrong. It wasn't bad.
And I remember
that was good.
Well, we did this conference call every night. At the end of the night, Jen was on it too, and it was just pandemonium panic. And Obama said, wait a minute, everyone calm down. It took me a year to figure out how to run for president. She's not going to figure it out in a week. And like 10 days later, she had clearly not figured it out when Saturday Night Live finished her. And this stuff is hard. And so you're going to, people are obsessed with these daily polls. My friend Christina Reynolds was in the back, and she was quoting the Daily Beast poll. And I looked at her and said, I don't even know who the fuck you are anymore. Like, who cares about polls, right? Every poll you've seen should be lit on fire and set, we can like sit around it and be warm later tonight. None of them matter. Just stay focused on your vision and who you're talking about, and that's how you win a presidential race.
You are staying for the reception, right? Because this is Messina sober. So
right.
Okay. So for lots of Democratic congressional candidates in 2018, they got to run on saying they would be a check on Trump.
Yep.
And the 2020 presidential nominee won't get that chance, right? So how do you convince voters who voted for Trump? This gets to persuasion strategy. How do you convince a voter who voted for Trump that they didn't make a mistake or they shouldn't feel bad for voting for a Democrat in 2020? What's the persuasion strategy?
Well, I would just argue that part of the reason why there's amazing new members of Congress, some of whom we're here today, is because they also ran on Donald Trump taking health care away. And that's part of the economic message that Messina is talking about. That's still an ever-present live issue. So there are still a number of issues Democrats can run on message-wise with that in mind. I think part of what some candidates do better than others is how they engage with voters. We're never going to win by saying, or this is not how you build a big party. You're immoral and stupid, but come to my party, And so part of what sometimes I think we need to work on is the self-righteousness and the tone by which we speak to people. I'm a coastal. I grew up in Connecticut. I live in Washington, D.C., right? But I'm not going to Iowa and saying, and I lived there for a couple of years, so I'll use that as an example, and saying, wow, I know more than you do about everything. And candidates shouldn't do that either. And there's lots of ways they do that. It's not as obvious as that. But I think we need to give people who voted for Trump an off-ramp. So I'll keep using Iowa as an example. There are 32 counties in Iowa that voted for Barack Obama and voted for Donald Trump. 32. That's 1/3 of counties in Iowa, right? That's bizarre land. So who are those people and how do we bring them back? We're not telling them they're dumb, you voted for Donald Trump. We're maybe saying you gave that guy a shot. He didn't do what he promised. He's not up to the task. He's not capable. Here's how we're going to make your lives better. So I think everybody's going to say it in a different way, but I think that would be my recommendation in terms of the tone and the approach.
Yeah, I think the DNC did a really good job today. They rolled out this failed promises narrative around Trump's announcement today in Orlando. And I think that's exactly right because, we're talking about 3 states, 77,873 votes in 3 states that he won. And we're doing this thing with the Messina Group where we're following 1,000 Trump-Obama voters in the Midwestern states and having a conversation with them online every week, showing them content, showing them ads, showing them press stuff, and just seeing what they react to, what they care about. And the truth is that frame the DNC is rolling out is right because they voted for him because they thought he was going to make their economic lives better. And the state chairs who were on the panel before this were exactly right. It really is about that. If you're a swing voter in a battleground state, you have 2.6 jobs. You think about politics 4 minutes a week in some of the research we did in 12, right? And it's a very specific narrative that you're looking for, and you want to know what he's doing to make your life better. And the fact is, things have gotten materially worse. And as we learned in 12, it is super hard to run for re-election as a sitting president of the United States because you have a record to defend, right? And Donald Trump last time could say, I'm for free air. And people would be like, well, I'm for free air. Okay, cool. And now he's got to say, well, you didn't do anything in free air. In fact, you took away health care from 10 million Americans who had pre-existing conditions. And now you want to make it go away for every woman who wants to have control of their own body. And now you're doing a bunch of other things. And he's going to have to defend those in those battleground states. We just have to be very specific because, there's this great Washington Post thing. He's lied 10,800 and whatever times. We just have to pick the
Glenn
2 or 3.
Kessler's not determining
Correct.
who people vote for,
Correct.
unfortunately.
Correct. We've got to figure out which of those we're going to be on and state a message. And, just to give her a little credit. Psaki's the best I've seen about staying on message and staying focused, but doing it in a way that actually matters to people and talks in languages that are normal language, not like you're a lecturer at the University of Montana, where I'm a professor.
Hey. Oh, okay. Okay, so just on staying on message, y'all had it easy. You ran on that hopey, changey stuff. And you didn't really run on policy. You didn't have a plan for everything. So talk to us about how much narrative and messaging you need versus policy.
So I would say, you forget this, and we did run on hopey, changey stuff, but Barack Obama got on the map because he was against the Iraq War, right? Yeah. And the reason I use that example is because people saw he had the courage of his conviction. And I think policy is important when people are, it needs to be the backup to everything. But ultimately, no, the person with more white papers and policy papers doesn't become the president. And I love policy people and nerds and white paper that things are printed on. It's the knowing who you are and having the courage of conviction behind your policy, but then ultimately being able to translate that and speak to people about how things impact them. And I think we do that sometimes better than others. So I'll give you an example. The Paris Climate Agreement, which I fully support, I'm sure everybody here probably does, that phrase should never be uttered anywhere. Because what is that? I mean, it sounds elitist. What does it even mean? And you can talk about climate change, and I use that example because that's an issue that's on the map in a way that it was certainly not in 2008 or 2012 in the same way, in a way that matters to people, because it does, right? But you're talking about clean air and clean drinking water and asthma, and how there's growing asthma rates in children, and crops, and how there's droughts. And so I would also say it's about making things accessible and not thinking about how you want to project your own white paper that you got from a think tank. I say that because I work at one, so I can say it. But how people are talking about issues in their communities, and that requires candidates listening. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you said earlier, I've spent the last few years helping presidents and prime ministers get reelected. And what you realize about policy in that situation is, especially in this Democratic primary, policy is super important because we are having to fire a sitting president. And you have to make a case to voters why your solutions are better. It really is at some point going to be about who's going to make your life better. The age-old question, are you better off? And there has to be some tangential, they have to believe you actually have a plan. Now, I totally agree with Psaki that the most important thing is having a message, right? What do you want to do as President of the United States that's going to make people's lives in X state better? And you have got to be very specific. But it is a different thing running like he did last time in an open race, at this time as we're trying to fire him. Because people are going to say, A, do I want to fire him? And B, is the alternative credibly better? Yep. And that is the challenge of beating an incumbent. And so you've got to give them some things to say, this is why life is better. The best example of this, 1992, Bill Clinton's middle class tax cut. He said to people, A, the economy sucks and the economy's stupid, but he gave them one thing about what their life would be, and that was his tax cut idea. People don't even remember it 20 years later, but at that election, that was incredibly important. There are really important policy things. Jen's exactly right. There would be no Barack Obama winning the primary without the Iraq War. Yeah. It just is a very credible thing, and there aren't really, in this primary, issues that are really going to separate Democrats in the primary, right? We're really going to look at two things. We're going to say, who can beat Donald Trump, and who am I passionate about, right? Democrats want to fall in love. Everyone in the room is like, I love Barack Obama. I fell in love. I want to fall in love again. And there's other people in the room that are like, no, I just want to beat fucking Donald Trump. Yeah. I mean, just tell me who can beat him. And the truth is, we want to do both things. Yeah. And to do that, you have to have some policy. The first debate on next week, people are going to go deep into the policy. And I think that's good for us because we need to talk to the country about where we're going to take them.
Okay, so in presidential campaigns, the winners are geniuses. The losers are morons forever. So I want you to talk to us about some mistakes you made and what advice you would give candidates based on where you screwed up.
I'll tell you the biggest mistake I've ever made in my political career. So when I told Barack Obama not to do super PACs, and that we were above super PACs, and we didn't do that, and then he had to flip his position on national television. We had to change the entire campaign because we opposed Citizens United, which he believed, and y'all remember he criticized the Supreme Court from his speech in the State of the Union. This is one of his most passionate things, and I got on the whole train, and you're right, and we can do this without it. And then, Karl Rove's super PAC put $150 million on television, and we had to switch, and we looked like a flip-flopper for the first time and did some damage to his brand. That was a complete mistake that I made.
I think he's okay now, though.
Yeah.
He made it.
He won.
Right, he's doing fine. I have two, and I certainly had a role in them, but I use them mainly because I think they can be informative for people working on campaigns or in future looking. One is some people here may have heard of Reverend Wright, which was a challenging period of our campaign in 2008. And I was the traveling press secretary, so I was a part of maybe the three press conferences maybe we did where we sent then Senator Obama out to explain it, and he never got it quite right.
But the Philadelphia speech.
Well, no, I'm getting there. He saved it because he gave the speech on race, which was one of the best speeches he ever gave. But the lesson there was, I remember that period of time. There was obviously the inflammatory language that came out, the first one. We had no idea what else had been said. We didn't know. It was like a void where we didn't know what else we didn't know. And so I would say the advice I would give from that is that you always want to know what your vulnerabilities are and where can people go after you, even if you can explain it or it's not fair or what have you. The second thing I would say, and this is when I was in the White House in 2016, but he did an interview with Politico. It's not Politico's fault. Where he semi-endorsed Hillary Clinton unintentionally. That wasn't the purpose. We completely underestimated Bernie Sanders. We underestimated Bernie Sanders' power, Bernie Sanders' support among young people. I think that's a lesson because it hurt us in the general election as a party, and that as we're looking ahead to the next 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, out of the 23, there'll be a nominee, right? And I think if we can find a way to coalesce around that person, we're all going to be better off. But remember that each of these candidates has a base of supporters and people, and you have to be respectful of that and find a way to bring them into the envelope.
Yeah, and I got one more because actually I always think you learn more from a loss than a win. Yeah. And the other, Barack Obama once said to me, I don't pay you to tell me when I'm right because everyone does that. I pay you to tell me when I'm wrong. And for the candidates in the room, do your debate prep, especially before the first debate when you're the re-election president of the United States. And
that was a dark day. I had to do Fox News the next morning. It was really...
It was the worst, worst day ever. And you could see it coming, right? They flew me out to give him a poll briefing, and they were doing debate prep, and I show up, and I'm like, how is it? And they're like, it's terrible. And he's like, hey, Messina, I'm going to go play golf. And I'm like, oh, fuck. But he's the president of the United States, and he'd been really busy, and it's hard. And I remember that was the worst night I think I've ever had. And it's obvious during the debate we were losing very badly. And, our pollsters on the phone were watching these focus groups. You could see how bad it was. And so we're in the back, and I had not been at the debates in 2008. I ran Chicago. And so this is my first debate, right? And we're sitting in the back trying to decide what we say. And I remember David Axelrod saying, Jim, do you know the bad news about being the president's campaign manager? And I said, what's that, David? And he kicks the door open to the spin room and says, you first. And I slide out there, and I'm like, and they're like, what do you think? I'm like, we won this debate. And all the reporters started laughing. And one of them leaned over and goes, you're going to have to do better than that. And so, we go through this worst spin, and we get on the plane to fly back to Chicago, and everyone's in panic. And we have an hour, and we just start drinking. We're like, oh, my God. And so we land, and I turned on my phone, and it's just blowing up. And the first call was my mommy. And I, of course, took my mom first, and my mom goes, are we fucked?
Oh, well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree now, does it? That actually reminds me, at the reception, we should talk about Carter versus Reagan in the 1980 debate. Similar story,
Yeah.
except with different consequences when you don't prep. Let me switch gears a little bit and talk about one thing that's different from 2012. And that's the rise of social media and the manipulation of it, whether it be from foreign governments or individuals. So, what's your response to the question of if you believe it's a real problem, and what do campaigns need to do about it?
So on the actual, is it a real problem? It's absolutely a real problem. I don't think there's been an international election that I've been part of in the past 4 years where there hasn't been some foreign government, foreign agency, foreign people trying to play. I mean, it's been proven that it was part of the Brexit deal. It's been proven it was Trump 16. It is happening all over the place, and it's absolutely something that we didn't even talk about in 2012. We had no cybersecurity budget. There's a point at the time, Matt Storff, my amazing colleague, makes to me all the time. Now, in a campaign, you need a cybersecurity budget. You have to have people who think about this all the time. You have to kind of think about, you're going to get hacked. The committees are getting hacked. All these things are happening. And that just wasn't something I even dealt with 5 years ago.
Yeah, I would say you need to demand better from the platforms. And there are a couple of specific things, and don't buy what they're selling you all the time is what I would say. Because one, yes, there's disclosure for political ads. There's not disclosure for issue ads. I think everybody here knows that there's lots of ways to get around that. There is not disclosure for a number of foreign organizations. So if you're RT or Sputnik, right, Russian outlets, you can buy ads. There's not disclosure for that. We still don't know when there are bots on Twitter. So there are a lot of examples of this, but we don't know. And I would also just add, in 2016, it was not just the paid ads that was the driver of it. It was kind of earned media versions of what was happening on social media that was pushing the dissemination. So there needs to be more discussion about it, more awareness. But I think as powerful political players, you should be demanding more from the platforms, because there's not nearly as much transparency and disclosures as there should be.
Thank you. That was really insightful. So, thinking about going forward, and this is a really smart room, a very good-looking room, and we want you to talk to us about what are the indicators or metrics that we should keep our eye on to really understand if Democratic candidate nominee is going to break through. So is it Trump's approval rating? Is it voter enthusiasm? Is it name recognition for Democrat? Like what will you be watching in both the primary and the general election?
First of all, don't look at any poll. I mean, just a reminder, in this exact date, in 2007, Barack Obama trailed Hillary Clinton by 15 points. Rudy Giuliani was up by 8 over John McCain. Joe Lieberman was leading. 4 years ago, Donald Trump was at 4% in the polls, and he became president. So they're all just garbage. Not because they're bad, not that they're whatever. I don't.
Including his internal polls?
Yeah, he fired his pollster. So that's one. Two, in the general election, I always cared way more about enthusiasm than I did anything else. Enthusiasm matters very deeply, because are our voters going to be excited? And that's part of what you could see happening in 2018. You knew there was going to be a wave because our enthusiasm number just jumped. Now, his enthusiasm number is amazing too. So then you look at the economic argument, right? You really do track whose side are you on, and who has the better economic argument for your family, who will make your family's life better. Those are the numbers that we'll be looking at very, very closely. And in the primary, we're just not going to look at anything for a while. We're just going to let them go make their cases, and then, disregard it and kind of understand, because everyone's going to have their 10 minutes in the sun. Everyone's going to have, like 6 months ago, none of us could have predicted Pete Buttigieg's moment. He's having that moment. There's other people rising all over the place. And so that's good for the party. And I'm not going to get too excited about it until we get closer.
I would echo the enthusiasm point, and there's lots of ways to look at that. Not certainly through data, when it gets to be the appropriate time, but also just in your communities. I mean, I live in Arlington, Virginia, which is a pretty democratic place. But if my neighbors are taking their kids to go door knock, and they're talking about having seen the presidential nominee on TV. They're not, my neighbors that aren't political at all, and people are wearing T-shirts in the streets. I mean, there's anecdotal cultural feelings, and whether we like it or not, kind of a cultural movement is where when you know your candidate is breaking through. I'd also though look at the nominee and how they are talking on the stump, right? Because you know they're doing well if they're giving the same speech everywhere they give, and if people can echo some of the lines or the language from it, and it's breaking through in that way. So that may be a hard thing to track, but as close political watchers, I would certainly watch that as well.
So final question. You're supposed to sigh. No. Okay, I'm going to make it multiple choice, though.
Oh, cool.
So here's the deal. So I don't think gambling's allowed in South Carolina, so we're going to pretend we're in Vegas. So question A, if you had to bet, who do you think is going to win the Democratic nomination in the White House in 2020? That's question A. It's a multiple choice. Question B, who's going to win the first debates next week? Yeah. And question C, what worries you at night and you can't fall asleep?
Okay, I'll do C. No. I'll do B too, and I'll do a prediction. I promise you, the headline is going to be after next week's debates. Democrats don't say anything. There isn't a big moment. They're all over the place, and there's no cohesive Democratic message because there's 20 people in the fucking debate.
And
so
they'll speak for 6 minutes.
Right,
each,
they'll speak for 6 minutes. So I promise you, there's going to be full-blown panic next week. And the thing that keeps me up at night, back to the platforms that Jen talked about, President Trump is out spending a devastatingly amount of money in the battleground states, doing exactly what we did in 2011 on economic narrative in these states. And, his current approval rating is 43 or 44. And if you kind of look at his current approval rating in the states, you say, how does he get there? It looks very hard for him to get there. But his economic approval rating in the battleground states is 51, and that's how he gets there. And so we've just got to, and a bunch of groups are working on this, while we have this 917-way primary, we have got to stay focused as a movement on pushing back against Trump on these economic issues in the states that matter. And we really have to be laser focused about it, and that's my thing that keeps me up at night. And then next Jen will predict the Democratic nominee.
All right, I'm going to do B and C too. Only because for the first time ever, my husband jokes that I have a really good track record for because I worked for John Kerry and then Barack Obama. But I really have no freaking clue who's going to be the nominee. And I think there's lots of exciting candidates. And if we don't nominate a self-proclaimed socialist, maybe we'll probably be okay. Or I hope so. What I am most worried about, though, I think is complacency and not showing up. And this may be because I'm, again, around this, echo chamber of people that actually are not in touch with what's happening in the country in D.C. And it's this, do you think Donald Trump is definitely going to win or not going to win? And people say, oh, today I definitely think he's going to win. It's based on what? Or today I think he's not going to win. So I worry about complacency and not focusing on where we need to invest blood, sweat, tears, door knocking, data gathering, communicating, having coffee at the neighbors 17 times to get them your way. I know that is something that people who work at state parties are very aware of, and campaigns. But I don't know that there's enough urgency happening right now, and I think it needs to be upped. What was the other question? I don't know. What was the first one?
Oh, if you're in Vegas, who you're betting to win the nomination in the White House? You want to do that one?
I skipped that one. I skipped that one.
Okay.
Here, let me just do complacency, then you can remember your thing. Because I have this weird world where I live half in Montana and half in San Francisco. And so I have no neighbor in San Francisco who doesn't believe Donald Trump will be defeated by 72 points. And I have no neighbor in Montana who doesn't believe he's not going to get reelected. Yeah. And if you just look at the numbers, because he's so divisive and because he's done nothing to reach out to swing voters, this election is going to be super close both ways, right? We're going to talk about 2 or 3 states. There's just not going to be this mammoth 10 states that were in play for both parties thing because of the way he's running his campaign, et cetera. And so Jen's point is exactly right about complacency. I promise you we will be sitting there on election day not sure who's going to win. It's going to be that close. And so we just need to do every single thing we have to do for the next 503 days until, Psaki says we can start drinking on election night.
Yeah. Don't listen to me on that front.
There's a story she can tell you about Jen drinking on election night that's actually very fun.
Well, speaking of drinks, I want to thank Third Way, the Black Economic Alliance, and Winston Fisher for bringing us together, but for bringing vim and vigor to the conversation. Thank you to Jen Psaki and Jen Messina.